Now recording. So, how is everybody today?
Good.
How are you?
Doing okay. You guys have a good break week?
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people I've asked that question were like, I had a homework. It's like, yeah, I had homework too. So, the plan for today, we're going to finish off Module 2. We are going to introduce Assignment 3. I'm going to explain why Assignment 3 is due when it is due. And if we're lucky, we might be able to get into the next module ever so slightly. Any questions, comments, or concerns before we launch off on this epic journey? No? Okay. I think perhaps I will open the class for a very special treat for those of you who were on time. So, with respect to Assignment 2, which I'm sure everybody is diligently working on, the requirements call for a text area element. There is a difference between a text area element and an input element. Text areas and inputs are not the same thing. Let me just give you a quick hint, as it seems people are having schools. Why don't I just search it? W3 schools text area. There we go. So, text area. This is what a text area looks like. You will notice that it is not a type of input tag. In fact, if you try to take an input tag and set the type to text area, it will use the default value for that field. Can anybody tell me what the default value for a input is? Just a text box, right? So a lot of people are like, oh, that looks like text, but it's not actually a text area. This is a text area, and the stuff in the middle, that is the contents of the little text box that you're creating with the text area. So you can access that using inner HTML or inner text, which is different from how you typically get stuff out of an input. How do you usually get stuff out of an input? Value, that's right. So just be aware of that distinction, as that is a distinction called for in the assignment document. Everybody should get perfect on that now, right? I hope so. So, and perhaps I will just take a very brief moment to make the comment that if your go-to resource for everything is the accursed infernal chatbot, that thing will actually very commonly give you common misconceptions about how things work. So, just because an answer is popular doesn't mean it's correct, right? It is always better to go to primary resources such as W3 Schools. All right? W3 Schools is already a summary. All right? Anyway. So, one moment whilst I load the LMS. So, did we leave off about here? Did we do events? Blank stares from the audience. Does anybody remember where we left off? No? Does anybody have a clue what's going on? I know I don't. Okay. Surely we did using get element by ID and get and query selector and why query selector is better, right? We've done that. We know how to modify CSS properties from JavaScript. Yes? No? Okay. I have to say I'm really blown away by the levels of engagement today. You guys have a test or something? Had a test? Yesterday? Oh, come now, you should bounce back from a test faster than that. You're young, you're springy. Which test was it? Java? Ooh.
Because the snowstorm and got like delayed.
We're so ready for it, sir.
Past the break week and then.
Yeah. Oh, this would have been the one that was supposed to happen on the snow day.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard the profs complain, the other professors complaining about it in the office. What a day for a snow day, I hear poor Keegan say. Who is your Java prof? Is it? Yeah. Yeah. What a guy! So, events. When you're writing programs, there are you can take programs and divide them into two distinct styles, right? This isn't a difference in programming languages, but how these languages are used. The first style is the style that we've more or less been doing in JavaScript so far, and the style that you have been doing in Java so far, procedural programs. You write a program, you fire the program up, it does something more or less on its own, might require a few prompts, but more or less it's doing things on its own. It finishes, gives you a result, the program is finished, right? Procedural programming. Procedural programming is great if you want to run something quickly, if you have one specific task the program needs to perform, or if you want to take that program and script it and make it run automatically. Great applications. Not so great for user interaction, right? When it comes to interacting with human beings are very slow in comparison to the computer, right? The amount of time between us making like one click and then the second click in a double click is like 100 years to a computer in like relative terms, right? Because like the sort of operational speed of a computer, like computers think on like a nanoseconds scale, right? So, about 10 orders of magnitude faster than we do, right? You know what an order of magnitude is? It's a power of 10. So 10 is 1 order of magnitude higher than 1, 100 is 1 order of magnitude higher than 10. So, a preferred way of having the computer interact with a human is to have the computer wait and listen for some kind of event. Something happens, normally, something happens in association with a user doing something. This triggers some piece of code to execute. This is the idea behind event-based programming. JavaScript, because the purpose of JavaScript is to add interactivity to websites, we typically do more event-based programming in JavaScript than anything else. Basically, if your website has been designed so that it has to do a great deal of procedural programming before it's, before it's done anything else, probably you haven't designed the website very well. You're over-relying on JavaScript. Probably you're using JavaScript to do things that CSS probably should be doing, or you're using JavaScript to do things that HTML should be doing, or even you're using JavaScript to do things that your server-side language, such as PHP or Node, should be doing. If you're relying on a bunch of JavaScript to, for example, import a bunch of content into the initial load of a website, that's actually the server's job. The server should send you a complete website, right? JavaScript should be used to update a complete website, not build the website initially, right? Am I making sense? Yeah. So really, JavaScript is at its prime when it is executing in response to the user, right? Now, websites can be more and less programmatic. Like if you consider the cookie clicker website that we were looking at last time in class, like there's a fair amount of stuff that's kind of bouncy and jumpy and going on without even touching the thing, right? But for our purposes, even in cookie clicker, most of what's going on there that is sort of important is based on the user clicking on things, right? Hence the name of the game. So, and in addition to that, even when you're not listening for user events, there are other forms of events that you can have the program wait for and listen, as we're going to see. So, an event, as written in JavaScript, waits for some specific condition to be true, and then it launches a JavaScript function. So, in order to write an event, we need to know 3 things. All right? The first thing we need to know is what element of the page are we binding this event to? Events happen in specific contexts. If I'm setting up something like a click event, the first question should be, okay, what am I clicking on? Right? So, what element gets the event? Or what element should be listening for the event? Number 2, we need to know what sort of event we are listening for. There are many different types of events, and you can bind multiple types of events to one element, but not all in the same statement, right? Each time you create an event, you are telling the object to listen for one specific type of event. And we will be going through a number of different types of events over the course of this lesson. So 2, what sort of event am I listening for? And question number 3, what should I do when that event occurs? What should I do? What should I do in the event of an event? Making sense so far? So far, so good? So, the answer to the first question, we tell JavaScript what object we want to attach the event to by having a reference to that event, or reference to that object. We get object references, we get DOM references, the same way we have been so far, by using document.querySelector and grabbing a reference to a DOM element. We need to load the element into JavaScript. The answer to question number 2 will be the first argument of the addEventListener method. It is a string. These strings will correspond to specific options. You select the option that corresponds to the type of behavior you wish to create. Again, we'll be going through a few of them. The way that we tell the event listener method what we want the thing to do in the event of an event, we give it a function reference. We can do this in a couple of different ways. The way that's being illustrated here, we assume that we have a function in scope, in this case called dropHeading, and we pass that name into the function. We pass that name into addEventListener. The other way that you will see this done, which is quite common, is to declare an anonymous function as the second argument of addEventListener. This has the effect of making this line a bit like a super fancy function declaration. It's like I'm declaring a function, but it's actually an event function, and it makes everything sort of compact in one line, and if you squint at it, you can kind of think that it's like, okay, this is like a different type of function declaration. It's a bit like that. We'll see plenty of examples. So, any questions so far? So, if everybody could please open up your code editor of choice, we will do some actual honest-to-goodness examples, shall we? That's holding that up. Good grief. So, let's make a new HTML element. Or, HTML element. There we go. We shall create a head element. Oh. Can you see this in the back? Good. So, I should say that. Save. No. Save as. Today is the last day of February. I'm calling this events.html. So I would just like to point one thing out. This is kind of a do as I say and not as I do kind of a moment. When you submit assignments, please do the full HTML with the doc type and all of the stuff that goes in the head. Use the Emmet abbreviation, please. I only do this because I'm trying to do things quickly in Notepad++. This is not standards compliant HTML. All right? So please, when you submit stuff, please make sure it's standards compliant HTML. Thank you. So I'm going to put a script in events.js. Script. I'm going to make myself a nice little cozy div right there. And I'm just going to add some quick style properties. Again, do as I say, not as I do. There we go. A nice little website that does almost nothing. It is merely a green square. Hopefully at this point you guys can crack off something like this pretty quickly. So, it is my goal to add an event to this square. Now, the way that we have been doing this in the class so far is by using things like the onClick or onChange attributes in HTML. Previously, we would say something like onClick equals foo. Right? This would, assuming we had a JavaScript function named foo, this would execute the foo function on clicking the div. Right? So, this is okay insofar as it goes, but the reason that we're going through setting up events from the JavaScript side is because this is much less flexible than the approach in JavaScript. So, for example, let's say, just for the sake of interest, you're not trying to do this with one div, you're trying to do this with 50 divs, right? And perhaps each of those 50 divs requires a different function. Managing, setting up all of these events, right? In HTML, it swiftly becomes a major pain in the keister, right? If there's one thing we hate doing, it's picking through a document and propagating changes, right? A much better approach is to be able to programmatically apply events to elements of a page. So let's say, for example, you wanted to apply a, maybe a, like a double click event to like 50 elements in the page, right? In HTML, you would have to go into each of those 50 elements, set up one of these attributes, and hope that you got it right consistently and that you made no spelling mistakes, right? Possible, but painful. In JavaScript, you simply perform a query selector all, targeting all elements you want to apply the event to, loop through them, add the events, all in one place, and you're done, and it's reliable. And if it needs to change, all you have, like, if the particular elements you're applying it to have to change, you only have to change that in one spot, and that's the query that you're using to select things that you're applying the event to. And if you really want to, you could make that a variable and put it at the top of the file. If it's and that's a good idea to do things with which you anticipate may frequently change, right? That's kind of one of the important purposes of a constant, right? The reason we put constants at the top of a source code file is these are things the developer has identified as, this is something that you may want to modify. Here, I'm going to be a nice guy. Rather than picking through the code and changing it in every place, I'll just put it at the top of the file once, and that way it kind of, it's a bit like a pseudo configuration file at the top of your file, right? So, JavaScript, much more flexible. Not to mention, there are types of events that you can do in JavaScript that are difficult or impossible to do here. For example, there are a whole set of events that we're going to see that apply not to the document, but to the window. This is just the document. You can't get to window from here, right? So there's nothing you can do to trigger window-based events from the DOM, from directly modifying the HTML source. So, have I convinced you that you need to learn what I'm about to teach you? Okay, good. Basically, you should now take on clicks and on changes and stuff like that, shelve those as, if I need to do something quickly, I'll throw that in, but with the intention of doing it properly later, right? So let's fire up a JavaScript file. Events.js. There we go. So, let's apply a click event to this div, which makes it so that the console says hello, or we just do a simple print statement when the thing is clicked on, just to make sure we can get everything set up, right? So, the first thing we need is a reference to the element we are applying the event to. So, let d equal document dot query selector div. Now, this div, if there are multiple divs in the page, which one will this selector select? The first one, very good. So this is not really all that flexible, right? You probably don't want to go with this for like a final website. You probably want to identify them by class or ID, but for now, this will do. So to D, we wish to add event listener. The type will be click, and now we must specify the behavior. I'm not sure that I want to define a whole function with a name and everything, just to be able to print something to console. So let's make an anonymous function. Recall that anonymous functions are created by using the function keyword but not specifying a name. The other way that we could have done this is by using the quote-unquote arrow function. Arrow functions are lambda functions. If you know lambdas from any other language, these are lambdas. But they call them arrow functions because I guess they're Greekophobic. So, function, I'll just do this one for now. Console.log. Clicked. There we go. So, let's save it, reload, and boom, 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 boom. So, it hasn't worked. Now, let's try debugging it. The very, very first thing you should do when you're debugging JavaScript is, anybody? Hey, I think I heard it.
Open console.
Open the console. Yes, very good. Oh, hey. Looks like we've got an error. Uncaught type error. Cannot read properties of null reading at event listener. So, what does that mean? What does that error mean? Cannot read properties of null. What is null in this case? Sorry? The thing I did inside the square? Is this the bit that's null, the function? How many think yes? How many think no? Is this string click null? How many people think yes? How many people think no? How about D? Is D null? How many people think yes? How many people think no? Well, something's got to be null because it's complaining about something being null, right? So, here is a quick tip for all of you. Programming errors normally fall into two categories, right? The first category is errors in control structures, right? I've messed up a loop's condition so that it's looping too many times or not enough times, right? My if statements, I've nested them wrong so I don't get what I want out of it, right? The other typical problem that you have with programs, you have a variable that has a bad value. This is why, typically, in like your average debugger, when you're debugging, it lets you pause the program, view the state of all of your variables, right? So, if we can't figure out this error message, the next thing that we should do as our procedure is look at what the variables actually contain, right? Now, in our case, we have bound D to the global context, which means it's there in the console. We can just ask for its value. So what is D? Uh-oh. D is null. So, the meaning of this error, cannot read properties of null, reading at event listener, means that D is null. Basically, the dot operation doesn't work on nulls, which makes sense. Null isn't an object. That's how you get properties, methods, and attributes of an object, right? Null isn't an object. It's the same error we would get if we tried 3.addEventListener, right? So we now know what the problem is, but we don't know why the problem is. So, if D is being set to null, D is only being set in one place. Which line? Which line is D being set on? Easy question. That's right, line 1. So, it is reasonable to expect that we probably did the assignment correctly. At least I hope so. What is likely happening is document.querySelector div is returning null. So, if that's the case, the very first thing we should do is try to take the problematic code and execute it in the console. See if it's gives us the same result that it gave up there. Right? That's another excellent use of the console. Take some code and run it to see what it's doing. So let's try it. Document.querySelector div. Well, that appears to not be returning null, which is interesting. So up here, on line 1 in our JavaScript, that operation returns null. Over here in our console, that operation does not return null. It returns what we wanted and expected. So, does anybody have any idea why that might be the case? Why has this operation gone from not working to working while we had our back turned? Anybody? Any ideas? Yes? No? You had a little idea? No? Okay. Yeah?
I don't know, maybe the Java document is not connected really well to the HTML document, and that's why it's trying to recollect and try to put bit of a document that really consider that it doesn't exist.
You're in the ballpark, but not quite. Anybody else? Yeah.
Suppose you haven't assigned a function to it or something?
No, it's not because I haven't assigned a function. Well, in a sense, again, you're kind of in the you're in the ballpark, but not quite there. What your suggestion would have fixed it under certain circumstances, but it's not the reason why, right? Anybody? So, yes.
It's not in a document event function, so it's not being called.
You are closer. You're within the infield, but still not quite. But it is related to the readiness of the document, right? So, let me ask you a question. When the browser loads an HTML page, does it do it all at once or one line at a time? Line by line, one line at a time. So, let's take a look. Somebody got it. So here, let's take a look at our HTML. This is being loaded one line at a time. We load HTML, we load head, then we load the script. The browser executes JavaScript as it encounters it. So, when the browser hits line 3, it says, oh, I need events.js. It goes out, reaches out, asks the server for it, pulls it back in, reads, interprets, executes it at that point in time. It then continues to load the rest of the document. Then it loads the style block, head, body, div, body, HTML. At the point when our JavaScript is looking for the div, the body has not been loaded. That's the reason we're getting this error. The script wants this thing, but this thing doesn't exist yet. It hasn't been loaded, it hasn't been interpreted. So, when the script looks for a div, that search operation says, I don't have any divs, what are you talking about? Here, have a null. So that's what it does. Does that make sense? So that's why we're getting that error. It's a very common error in JavaScript. So, now that we know the cause of the error, we can do things to fix it. There's a bad way and a good way. I'll show you the bad way first, and show you why the good way is better. Relying on your knowledge that the browser will run the JavaScript when it encounters it in the file, can anybody propose a solution that would cause this JavaScript to be executed after the body is loaded?
I mean, I know what the bad way is, just to put it down the div, but like, that's not it.
I didn't say it was a good solution, but it does work. So one thing that can be done, although it's not recommended, because basically it betrays a startling lack of education in the matters of JavaScript. You can take the script, pop it at the bottom. There you have it. This is like the way they used to do things in the 90s and stuff. If you take the script and put it physically after the entire page, the JavaScript will execute after the page has been loaded, because it's the last thing it does. So if we save that, reload our page, ta-da! It works. But this is not preferred practice, and not just because it kind of makes you look dumb. There are good reasons that this is not preferred practice. Can anybody take a guess why we kind of don't want to do this? Why is this anathema?
Maybe there's things you don't want it to be looking through.
Conceivably, although there's really, I can't think of any particular thing that you wouldn't want the JavaScript to have access to at a particular point in time. But I won't exclude the possibility, but that's not the reason.
No.
Yes?
The organization of the document.
Document organization, yes. So let me ask you a question. When you write a Java program, where do the imports go? Right at the top. When you write a Python program, where do the imports go? Well, I suppose, did you guys even write Python programs that needed imports? That's not even necessarily because it was, the AI version of Python. Like, in Python, historically speaking, you probably wouldn't really need anything in a library. Part of the reason that people like to use Python for early programming courses is that the Python prelude includes quite a lot, more than a lot of other languages, So you kind of don't need to import everything because it's being imported by default. Much of the much of the common stuff. Like for example, the being able to write, system.out.println, that kind of stuff in Java. Do you need an import for that? Actually, I forget.
No,
No?
you just write.
You do for reading though, if I recall. The scanner you have to import. Pretty sure.
You do.
Yeah. In Python you don't. You just get the import or the input function. In Java you can.
You have to import,
Yeah, you have to import, but in Python you don't. Yeah. But anyway, it's not really important. So the HTML document kind of thinks of JavaScript as being imported code. Imported code should go at the top. Imported code goes at the top so that another developer can very quickly and easily scan the beginning of your document and see which files in the file system are relevant to it. It's a courtesy thing. Like if you're importing JavaScript like on line 4323, it's probable that another developer isn't even going to find it, because like nobody should have to Control F to find your script elements, right? I do that when I'm marking PHP assignments because I'm doing like intentional I'm doing intentional JavaScript injection attacks to try to see if people are doing their filtering properly. But like in general, you shouldn't have scripts anywhere other than in the head. So that's the reason. So we can solve this problem using events. If we take a look at our JavaScript, there is another form of event which we can use. It triggers when the DOM has fully loaded. So rather than having the JavaScript execute all at once, we simply define a function to be executed when the DOM is loaded. This is the preferred approach. It's not like absolutely strictly analogous, but you can think of it as Java's equivalent of public static void main, right? You can think of it like a main function. So there are also a couple of different ways of doing this. If you are a person who came to this class with pre-existing JavaScript knowledge, you will have a few, like there are different, there's always more than one way to skin a cat, right? So window dot add event listener load. If we put all of our stuff in here, why is that blank? What? Cut, paste, there we go. If we place the code, which originally we were just placing in the global context, if we place that inside of the window load function, this will only execute once the DOM has already been fully loaded, which means that it will work. It will work no matter where we put the JavaScript script tag in the HTML document, which means we can put it in the right place, which is in the head. We reload, and there we have it. Any questions?
Can you show the JavaScript document? Sorry.
Certainly.
No,
The JavaScript, yeah. There you go. Any questions about that? Should be reasonably straightforward. But you see, I hope, that like, if you don't use window.addEventListenerLoad, or whatever its equivalent is that you already know from a previous life, you can run into some pretty nasty bugs that are not easily diagnosable, right? So, good. So now that we've introduced the window object, let me speak a little bit about it. So, it's similar to document in a lot of ways. It is a big object that contains a lot of stuff that the browser sets up for you, right? If the document is the HTML, right, it's the DOM, window, although it's, strictly speaking, it doesn't correspond to the browser window. It corresponds to the browser tab. But it includes a lot of information about the environment in which the website is being viewed. We can see this if we take a quick perusal through the events available to window. So, the type of events that the window has. Now that you know this, you can write JavaScript that will trigger on any of these, right? So, for example, resize. When they resize the window, you can execute JavaScript. Copy, cut, and paste. This is, if somebody hits Control-C or Control-V, you can, you can run an event. For example, if I were the type of person that required you to write your assignments inside of a website that I designed myself, I would be able to send myself a little Ajax message anytime anybody pasted anything into the thing they're doing their assignment in, and thereby I would be able to catch cheaters under the assumption that anybody who is doing copy pasting of code isn't writing it themselves. You have events for disconnecting from the internet and reconnecting to the internet. These are kind of interesting ones. For a phone, like, you know how phones have accelerometers in them, and like this used to be a thing that you could get. You could get like games where you tilt the marble and stuff like that. People don't really do that anymore, but like the hardware is still there. You have access to it, which is kind of interesting. Like, you could make a mobile game tilt the marble style by using device motion, the window event. Probably a more pertinent one for everyday use is device orientation. So, if you take the phone and you like do it portrait to landscape or landscape to portrait, device orientation will fire an event, and you can do JavaScript based on that. So again, you could write yourself a little Ajax query that, sends data to a database about how many times you flip your phone while looking. How many times do users flip their phone while looking at your website? You can get that, right? I know that like a lot of these examples are like how to be evil with a website, but and take too much data, but so it goes. Just so you know. these ones are kind of stupidly named, but the convention is like kind of carried through. So focus and blur mean, like, think in a desktop environment. Is the window the active window, right? Is this tab the active program in your operating system right now, right? Focus is an event that triggers when the browser tab is not the active program and becomes the active program, i.e. when somebody clicks on it from without the browser, right? And then blur fires when the element loses focus or is no longer the currently active program in the operating system, right? You guys know what, does that make sense? You guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah?
Like for example, you have a website and you go to another website that will be blurred, like it lost focus.
Yes, yeah, it also when you change tabs, it has the same effect. Yeah. So, you know, according to JavaScript, right? So, this is the active window. I just focused this window. I just focused Notepad++ and blurred this one. You can actually do like CSS rules that like will blur the website when it's not in focus, which is kind of funny. Any questions about this? There's lots and lots of stuff available. Gamepad events, history events, load and unload events. That's the one that we just used. But you can also, like, another way to think of the load event is like a bit like a constructor in Java, and the existence of a constructor implies the existence of a destructor, even though they don't really tell. I don't think they really talk to you about destructors in Java, right? It has them though. It has destructors, but like the main purpose of destructors, like you need to know about them in C++. The main point of destructors is for you to free the memory that is being used, but you don't have to worry about that in Java. So, well, you should worry about it in Java, but nobody does worry about it in Java because of the garbage collector, right? The garbage collector goes along and snorkels up any memory that you leave behind, so at periodic intervals, so you don't really have to worry about freeing your own memory. But holy hell in a handbasket do you have to worry about that in C. That's kind of like, okay, so you know Windows? You know how, like with Windows, every so often you have to reset the computer? Like it doesn't really matter how careful you are with the computer. Like if you leave the computer running for like, I don't know, like 3 weeks or something, it just gets really, really, really slow and you have to reset it, right? It'll, like that point will vary, but it's never gone away. That's called memory leaking. So what's happening is operating system processes, which are mainly written in C, are allocating memory to themselves, but they are not freeing that memory when they're finished with it. So every time that little subroutine runs, you effectively lose a little chunk of your system memory, right? Now, over time, losing little pieces of chunks out of your RAM because the operating system has lost track of them means that gradually your RAM starts looking like Swiss cheese, and you eventually run out of space in your RAM. Does anybody know what an operating system does when it runs out of RAM?
It starts using the hard drive and building a page file.
That's right. It starts caching to your hard drive, right? So the reason that we use RAM is because it's much faster than permanent storage, right? So when the operating system starts caching memory in the hard drive as opposed to the RAM, your computer slows right down. Like, it's like that is what's happening when you hit that sudden point of it's like, oh, you know, I can no longer do anything. I can barely open I can barely open the menu to restart the computer. That's what's happened, is it's caching to the hard drive. So if you're on a Windows machine, restart it every once in a while. Although it's kind of funny because Windows doesn't want you to restart it as well. Like, it has this thing where like Windows Update takes so bloody long that it wants to do it at night, which it's like, just leave your computer running overnight. We'll be fine. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. It's like, but the memory leaks. Stupid Windows. You know how long it takes? Like, okay, I know I'm on a bit of a tangent. I'll wrap it up. My wife has a computer, which unfortunately is Windows, you know, and she wanted to do something on her computer, and she hadn't fired the thing up in like a good probably 8 months, because she doesn't need to do things on the computer very often, right? It literally took that computer a full 24 hours to get up to date. Just to finish Windows Update took 24 hours. My Linux machine updated to a new bloody version of the operating system from Mint 21 to Mint 22. Guess how long that took? 6 or 7 minutes. Windows. Stupid Windows. Good grief. There's nothing you can't do on Linux these days that you can do on Windows anyways. Oh, it's such a pain. Alright, anyway. So, long story short, lots of Windows events. Lots of window events, not Windows events. They're fun. Take a look through. Use them at your pleasure. Don't try to hack my computer, though, please. I'd appreciate it. So now, let's take a look at some of the events which are bindable to DOM elements. Specifically, let's talk about mouse events. You also have keyboard events, right? But, you know, let's just do mouse for now. They're the typical list of things. Clicks, double clicks, mouse over, mouse out. So mouse over is like, you know CSS hover? It's like the first frame of hover is mouse over. And then mouse out is like the last frame of hover, right? So sometimes, like, when it comes to events, like, you don't really want one continuously running. That's not really the point, right? Like, if you think about, like, the difference between, you know, like the equivalent of hover in JavaScript, right? Let's say we wanted to make our div, like, green on hover, right? What we really want to do is make it green when the hover starts, and then, you know, return it to its previous state when the hover ends, right? We don't want to be continuously writing, you know, style.color is equal to green, or background color is equal to green every single frame that the mouse is in the thing. That's wasteful, right? You're just taking CPU cycles and throwing them away, right? Because variables hold their value, right? You can set it once, and it will maintain its value until you set it again. That's how variables work. So, you also have mouse down and mouse up, which correspond to depressing and releasing the click button on a mouse. When you are designing for mobile, is there such a thing as mouse over and mouse out? No. Hover events do not work on mobile devices, so please keep in mind that, like, if major components of your website rely on hovering, it's not going to be mobile friendly, so you shouldn't do it. Make sense? Okay, so let's do a couple of examples now. So d dot style dot background color is equal to red. Oh, come on. Oh. That'll do it. Oh my goodness. That wasn't a syntax error. That wasn't a look at it. Look at it. That wasn't a syntax error. I hate you, JavaScript. That should have been a syntax error. I hope everyone in this room agrees that should have been a syntax error. Otherwise, you just failed. You just failed the class. So, a thing that you can do as well, you can toggle between two different colors. There we go. And now, if it's red, if it's not red, it turns red. If it's red, it turns green. Let me demonstrate mouse over and mouse out. Mouse over, turns it blue, and you can still click. Oh, and by the way, please nobody give yourself a seizure with rapidly oscillating colors. Seizure warning. So, mouse over. Ooh, hello. Oh. Mouse out. There we go. So, mouse in, turns blue. Mouse out, turns purple. Clicking causes seizure-inducing rapid color oscillations. So, you want to see the code? Hopefully you guys saw that going from one to another of these, like the code itself, requires only a few different minor adjustments. Particularly the event. This also demonstrates that you can bind multiple different event types to one object, although you cannot bind multiple functions to one event. That's one thing you can't do. So I made a mistake previously where I didn't update mouse over here, so I had to find mouse over twice. One time I was writing it blue, the other time I was writing it purple. It took the last one. It took purple. Make sense? Any questions? Okay. So, over the next couple of weeks, you're going to find that Java and JavaScript are going to come closer and then closer and closer. They're going to kiss in the middle, and then we will depart again for the exams. The material in this course is going to seem very similar to the material in Java for a while, for a period of some weeks. Once we're finished this module, we are going to be learning SVG graphics, scaled vector graphics. That's module 3. This is a vehicle for showing you how to do proper DOM manipulation. In Java, you're going to be using JavaFX to write events within the next number of weeks. So we've done events. We're going to be doing SVG. SVG is actually the system underlying JavaFX. So many of the same commands that are used in JavaFX will also show up here in JavaScript when we start doing SVG graphics. So yeah, as I say, we're going to kind of meet in the middle and then go off again with Java over the next couple of weeks. So, the event object. So, when an event occurs, there is information about the event which is generated, which is passed to the function handling the event. At the moment, we are ignoring it. Our functions, our callback functions for these events, are not accepting any arguments. That does not mean in JavaScript that they're not being passed arguments. So, the add event listener, this method, will pass an event object as the first parameter of the callback function when an event occurs. Now, in Java, if you define a function to take no arguments, how many arguments does it expect? Easy question. If a function in Java takes no arguments, how many arguments does it expect? 0, yes. And if you give it something other than 0, what do you get? You get an error. In JavaScript, if you define a function to take no arguments and something passes it arguments anyways, it just ignores them. It doesn't bind them to a name, and it essentially throws them away, right? So, for example, if I have a function foo that takes nothing, then later on I call foo with the value of, for example, an object cancer.cure, right? What JavaScript will do is it will take the cure for cancer and throw it right in the bin without even looking at it. That's what it will do. All right? So, in this case, we are being passed an event object that we are not using. It's okay to not use the event object if you don't need it, right? But it does contain useful information. For example, like, it contains a lot of useful stuff, look up the documentation, but let's focus on client X and client Y. Console.log. Event.client X, event.client Y, ah, 6850, 339.54, 350, 350, 50, 350. You see, this is the coordinates at which the click event occurred relative to the object. This can be useful. For example, maybe we want to have a little polka dot happen when we click on something, right? Oh, why do I? Let's add, I'm going to add a class box here. Div dot will be order 2 pixels, solid black, width 20 pixels, height 20 pixels, order dash radius 12 pixels, and I know that's too much. And background color. Somebody give me a CSS color.
Orange.
Okay, orange. Yeah. So, here we go. So now, I'm going to show you literally the worst way to do the thing I'm about to do. I want to modify this div so that it contains a subdiv that is in this class dot, right? A way that I can do this is by directly modifying the inner HTML of the div as a string. d.inner HTML is equal to. Now, like we've done some examples here where we've we've inserted strong text or made it a heading or something. This is a little bit more complicated. So, inner HTML, there we go, div, and div. Let's make the class dot. We also want to modify some style. Well, will I do? Yeah, I'm going to do it the horrible way. The absolute worst way you can possibly do it. So we want margin left to be end string insert event dot client client x. And maybe we'll even subtract 20 there. There we go. Margin top event dot client y minus 20. There we go. Shall we see what this does? Oh. Well, it doesn't work immediately, although we do get the div. So let's take a look at our elements. Elements? No, what do I want? Yeah, where's the HTML? Event listeners. Load. Yes, okay. Layout. By the way, you can look at your event listeners here, but you know, you're probably not going to see much more than load. Is it up here? Yes, it's hidden up. Oh my goodness. Good grief. How do I get this? Get out.
Was it because we didn't declare the doc type that it's giving us someone as well?
Now, is that it? There. That's better. So there, you can see we have margin left 141, margin top 191. Now, you guys see the mistake that I made? Technically, one mistake in terms of actual syntax, and another mistake in terms of good housekeeping. I don't know, I feel like there's supposed to be something right there. I believe it's a semicolon actually in this case, yeah. We are missing the separator. And also pixels. Still not working. Alright, let's see. Is it comma? Maybe it is comma. Let's see. Oh, no! Ha ha ha! Ha 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 ha! I got it. And here's another pitfall for you. Is that how you write margin left? Should be a dash. That is how you do it in JavaScript. That's what the autocomplete gave me because it thinks I'm writing JavaScript. Right? Gotcha again. And by you, I mean me. There we go. It works! Cool, right? I'll leave the code up for you. But hopefully, all of that has indicated to you why this is a bloody awful way of doing this. That is why later on in the course we will learn how to not have to do that. and not directly manipulate HTML strings from within JavaScript, because holy cats, it is an awful way of doing things for exactly the reasons demonstrated in class. So, any questions? Yeah.
Can I see the HTML too?
Yeah.
Sorry. 92.
Cool. So, I think at this point I am going to declare our 15-minute break. Please be back here by 11:43. Thank you very much. So, welcome back. So, I'd like to take this opportunity to discuss assignment 3 with all of you. So let's take a look at that. So, the first thing that I would like to discuss is the due dates. So, I will say, at this point in time, you now have been taught everything you need to know for assignment 3. Right here, right now. Assignment 3. That's right. And I know you're all still working on assignment 2. But if you take a look at the due dates, assignment 2 is due March 2nd. Assignment 3 is due March 9th. Now, I realize that that is only a 1-week gap from assignment 2 to assignment 3. However, I have some justifications for this. First, the reason that we're in this situation in the first place is because I was unfortunately sick earlier in the term and things got moved down, unfortunately. The other reason that the second reason that I think this is a reasonable schedule, if you'll notice, the due dates past assignment 3 occur at normal 2-week intervals. The final due date for the final assignment is April 6th. This is 1 week before classes end. Right? This is the Sunday before the week where we have the last day of classes. So it is my intention to get assignment 5 done and out of the way, and maybe even hopefully graded before your final exam. Right? I think it is a good thing overall that there be nothing due in the final week, because this gives you time to study for the exams, which you should have some time to study for the exams. I'm pretty sure I got preliminary exam timetables, but I didn't they're not finalized, so I haven't distributed them to the students yet, because there could still be some changes. I believe we're going to be on Thursday. I think client side is on the Thursday. I think at 4 in the afternoon they're going to start us on Thursday for exams for client side. But again, this is subject to change, so that is not the official and final word of the internet. So yeah, basically, everybody knows about the exam for this course, that the exam must be passed to pass the course. And to give you folks the best shot at that possible, I'm going to try not to load you up with assignment work immediately before the exam. Give you guys some breathing room. That is my intention. The third reason, okay, so why this assignment? In my estimation, assignment 3 is the easiest assignment of the assignments. The reason I say this is that pretty much all of the functionality in the assignment is given to you in textual form. There's not much to do outside of the text, aside from, you know, use Bootstrap to kind of make it look a little pretty. You know, that's about the extent of the creativity on this one. So if it's going to be any assignment, it should be this one. Does that make sense? So that's why I'm going to hold us to a 1-week gap going from A2 to A3 rather than a 2-week gap. I think it's well within the capability of anybody who has been, you know, engaging with the course so far. Okay? Are there any, would anybody like to voice any dissent, discontent, or rebellion? Would anybody like to form a rebellion against my benevolent dictatorship of the class? Yes? Okay. Well, yes?
The test is going to be on paper or a computer?
Yeah, the test is going to be on paper.
Paper?
Yeah. And it's going to be a new test.
What test?
Yeah. It means I'm going to write you test questions. Yeah. You know, like, part of the strategy of doing an online test is like you make the question bank large and the system picks from existing questions. But in theory, this saves you the work of like generating the test during the term, right? Never really works out that way, you know? I always like, you know, call me an old fuddy-duddy, but I just make a test and it's a paper test and that's the test. That's the way I do things. So, and since like there's only one section of this class that's running that's not being taught by me, it's like, you know, I'm only slightly kidding when I call myself the benevolent dictator of the class. So, but yeah, I will try not to destroy you. It's very difficult not to destroy you. You know, you have to appreciate my position. Like, all I have to do is like flex my finger in a particular manner, and it just destroys the entire class when I'm creating a test question. But I will do my best not to destroy all of you. I did at the beginning of term promise that we would have a mock test. That's still in the works. I'm thinking like maybe 2 or 3 weeks from now. When I say mock test, like we will hold a test as if it is a test, right? I will show you what I mean by testing conditions, right? But the grades from the mock midterm will not count towards your final grade because they can't, because that's, you know, that's prescribed by the course outline. So, we'll do a mock midterm at some point when I get around to producing such a document. And, it will, of course, be optional, the mock midterm. And, you know, if enough people skip it, I might even grade it for you. It depends on workload. Like, it's extra, like it's something I'm trying to do to be nice. Like, I gotta prioritize the assignments before I go after this, but but I will do my best to try to produce this so that you have at least some practice with testing on this material before you head into the exam. Okay? So, shall we talk about assignment 3 in particular detail then? So, let's see here. Is the camera running? Yes, it is. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. The goals of this assignment are practice using JavaScript to detect and respond to HTML elements, to detect and respond to events in an HTML CSS environment. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 make it look nice. Okay? I'm sure you've all read the header for the assignments at some point this term. I would like to point out an inaccuracy in this paragraph right here, right now. It says one HTML, one JavaScript, and one CSS file, at most one CSS file, but there is also a requirement for CSS animation in this, and we still expect you to not include style blocks in your head, so that implies that there should be a CSS file as well. Unless you're throwing away the marks for the animation. There should be a CSS file. Okay? So, so the JavaScript file must be loaded in the head element. Because this is applying events to elements of the DOM, this means that you're going to have to use the window load event or similar in your solutions. I'm not going to be thrilled if I see script tags at the bottom. That's not the way things are done. Thank you very much. So it's kind of easiest if I show you the demonstration video first to kind of contextualize things. This assignment is a little bit like a slot machine, like a little tiny amount like a slot machine. It'd be actually really cool if you styled it to actually look like a slot machine. So there you go. So basically, the assignment consists of 3 images, all displayed side by side. There is a bank of 9 images. All of these images will have to be in a folder or something inside of your CS Unix folder. Once again, I do not want the images to be submitted via Canvas. Please, CS Unix is fine. I just want your source code on Canvas, right? But you have 9 images and 3 categories. In this example, the categories are cats, stars, and dogs, I think. Or something. I don't know. Maybe stars, cats, and paws. Boy, that really gives you pause, eh? Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's cats, stars, and paws. So, the features of the website. There is a countdown timer. When the timer expires, all of the images are randomized. There is a randomize button. When that is clicked, the images are randomized. There is an input field here that lets you set how long this timeout is. There is a counter over here which keeps track of the number of times an image has flipped. So if all 3 images flip, that goes up by 3. Does that make sense? And if you click on an image, it also randomizes it. It randomizes it and it plays a little CSS animation. Does that make sense? There's not much originality called for in terms of programming here. It's really just, the correct way to think about this assignment. Think of the assignment as a series of sentences. Each sentence is an individual programming task. Implement the task, test it, run it, make sure it works, move on to the next one. When you run out of sentences, you are finished the assignment. Okay? So, where is it? Is this it? I thought I had it open. Apparently, oh, I clicked the link. Stupid. All right, there we go. So, the page will follow the header main footer format previously used. A nav bar is not required here since there is only one page and it's not semantically appropriate to put miscellaneous controls there. Inside the H1 tag, put the title for your page. The footer should identify your name, student number, and current year. So your 9 images should occur in 3 categories. When you select your categories, please select them so that they are easily distinguishable from each other by me. So when you pick stuff, something like cats, dogs, and birds, fine, perfect, great. Something like, small trees, large bushes, not as useful to me, right? Please spare a moment for your poor professor who has to mark over 100 of these. So when the page is initially loaded, the screen should display 1 from each group, but after that it doesn't really care which groups these images come from. They must appear evenly spaced and responsive within the main element. Here's a helpful hint for you. This assignment, the layout for this assignment becomes much, much easier if you go in with your favorite paint program and crop all of your images to the same size before you start, right? It just helps. It just helps everything. And if you can't do cropping to the same size, at least get the same aspect ratio, right? If you don't have an image manipulation program that you like, I recommend an open source one called Krita. It's like as good as Photoshop, man, and free. It's great. So one of the things I really like about Krita is it's like as fully featured as you would expect anything to be, but the controls are still sufficiently intuitive that you can do the basic paint type stuff reasonably easily. So there you go. Use Krita. Everyone should use Krita. No, there's no reason not to use Krita. It's the best. It's just the best software. It's part of the KDE project. Do you know what KDE stands for? Cool Desktop Environment. That's right. Yeah, it's great. Actually, real talk though, I've been trying out various open source Linuxy type programs to do basic stuff for some years now, and over time I just kind of gradually accumulated KDE project programs, and then I realized, oh wait, these are all by the same people. Okay, well, I guess they're good at what they do then. And that's my relationship with KDE summarized. Although, KDE Neon, which is an actual Linux distribution, is hot garbage. Don't use it. Though, the KDE desktop environment, operating system and desktop environment are different things in Linux. The desktop environment, called Plasma, is what they use for the Steam Deck. So, there you go.
Why is it hot garbage?
They did a version update that broke my computer. Yeah. Well, it's like when I think what they were doing is they were trying to go from X to Wayland, and like they just broke the graphics drivers, and like the only thing I could do was like I was basically forced to do everything strictly from the command prompt, which, you know, like I'm okay with to an extent because, you know, Linux. But like at a certain point you do want a desktop environment. You don't just want a bash prompt. I was able to like get all of my stuff. There was no data loss. But yeah, I was at that point I was kind of just done with Neon. You guys know Distro Watch? For me, I always know I'm having a good day when I get to open Distro Watch. So along the left-hand side here, this is like currently maintained statistics on how popular each Linux distribution is. I generally use Mint. Mint is kind of my thing because I'm a painful normie, you know, who has a life. But Neon, right there, hugging 14th place. Like, yeah, it's just like slightly above Antix, which is the Linux distribution that's maintained by Antifa. That's an actual real thing. Generally, like, I also really like Debian, but Debian's kind of an interesting one. It's the base distribution on which like anything Ubuntu or Mint is ultimately based. It's maintained by like actual real companies who employ people only to maintain Debian, whereas a lot of these are fan projects. So like Debian is like the one that has the actual real like security experts working on it and that sort of thing. And it's also like, it's perfectly usable as well, Debian. It's a bit lighter weight than a lot of other stuff. Like, you know this Node course that I'm working on developing. I'm going to be forcing everyone to learn Linux, and I'm going to do that by giving everybody a Debian VM and saying, here, you do your work in this. But I went through a few distros trying to decide what to do for that, and I eventually landed on Debian because it's like, it's fully featured but light enough to be nice for a VM, you know? It's like, it's very base, but that's also kind of nice, you know? But yeah, anyway. You must learn Linux at some point. If you want to be useful as programmers, you must learn Linux at some point. And I don't care, I know that I'm a Linux evangelist, I know that, but it's true. You must learn Linux. So, continuing on. So, the images will be clickable using either onClick or the JavaScript add event listener. When the image is clicked, transformation animation plays, the image is changed to a random image. When you change to a random image, you are not required to make sure it's unique. It can also appear, you know, it doesn't have to be different from the ones that are already on the screen, although if you want to put that in, that's cool. Automatic refresh timer is set to reset, image counter is increased by 1. I am even boring myself by going through this. It is recommended that you store your image file names in a 3x3 two-dimensional array for ease of use, but this is not a strict requirement. Making the animation play can be a bit tricky. This code may help or not. It depends on how good you are at CSS. The input element must be within a certain range. This will get bound to the interval. So set interval allows a function to be called periodically at increments, right? What's its return value? What is the return value of set interval? We definitely did this in class. Somebody is looking it up right now. It's an identification number. The sequence of events that is set up by set interval has an ID number. That is the return value of set interval. You should be writing this down. That is the return value of set interval. When you want to remove one, there is a function called clear interval. If you give it the ID number of the interval that you set, it clears it. So you need to take the return value of set interval, save it to a variable, and destroy it when the user sets a new interval. Otherwise, you'll just get a million intervals, right? Good. The randomize button randomizes the 3 images. They do not animate. It increases the counter for the number of times the image has been clicked, and it resets the timer. A countdown timer until the next automatic refresh will exist, counting down in tenths of a second. When the timer reaches 0, your web application will behave as if the randomize button had been pressed. The countdown timer must go from green background to yellow to red as it approaches 0, but you get to decide where those transitions occur specifically. There you go. There is your creativity for this assignment. Advice. This assignment relies heavily on timers. Do not attempt to do everything in one timer. It is far simpler to have sub-timers controlling individual events. For example, the time is supposed to be ticking down by tenths of a second. You're supposed to do something every tenth of a second. How should you do that? You set an interval whose interval is tenths of a second. Ta-da! I just solved the assignment for you. So, miscellaneous requirements. Use Bootstrap 5 or def. Use semantic elements where possible or def. Follow the suggestions in the HTML, CSS, JS style guides or def. Validate your code using the HTML validator or Mark's loss, which is worse than def. So, any questions about assignment 3? Does that seem manageable? Hopefully? Okay. I'm getting a lot of blank stares. Everybody is doing good? Yeah? All right. So, let us return to our discussion of events. We have a few additional details to clear up. So, debugging tip. When you are using the window load event, your context is not the global context, right? The context for your variables is an anonymous function being attached to the event handler. This means variables you declare inside of there are not going to appear in the console. Now, the console is a very useful thing for interrogating the values of variables. So, you have two options. Either you write print statements the same way that people do in every other language, or you modify the scope of the variable on a temporary basis so that you can view it in the console. This is particularly useful if the thing that you're trying to view is not simple. If the variable you are trying to view is an integer, it prints fine. If the thing you are trying to view, well, actually I shouldn't say that. Console log does actually, 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other. Ignore what I was saying. Not the whole lecture, just the last sentence or two. So, basically, if in here I wanted to check to see what D is, I've got two options. Either console.log D, right? Or I modify the binding. If you simply remove the let keyword, it will by default bind it to the global scope. Having been bound to the global scope, you can then use the console to interrogate the object. Make sense? However, traditional warnings which apply to the use of global variables apply here as well. So, you don't want to leave it in this state permanently. When you have completed your debugging work, you should then put the bindings back in. Right? Now, of course, this is asking people to remember to do something, which is always, tenuous at best. But, you should fix the bindings if you've modified the bindings. To some extent, it might just be easier to use a print statement. It's kind of interesting. It's like there's this opinion that goes around about debuggers in general, and debuggers are kind of never quite as useful as just print statements. Now this might just betray that somebody isn't effective at using the debugger, right? But it is generally true that most of what you need to know, you can always get to using print statements. So really, the print statement really is your it's your bread and butter for debugging, right? Have they talked to you guys much about debugging in other classes? Not really? There's a debugger attached to IntelliJ that you can use. Okay. On the subject of me handing out gifts today, let me show you something. So I know the website's called Python Tutor. Has anybody seen this thing before? This thing's cool. So it doesn't just do Python, it does Java, C, C++, and JavaScript. But let's take a look at Java. right? So, they've changed it. So, if you want to see, like visually, how your variables are changing as you're writing, as your program executes, this is an excellent online tool. It has limitations. It can only accept so many lines of code, and like once you start getting into like the big multi-class assignments in Java towards the end of the class, you know, this might fall down a bit. But check this out. I assume by this point you've seen swap done, right? Have you guys not seen swap? Hopefully. How many people have not seen swap? Okay, so, okay. When you're using variables, this is very important to know. If you have x and you have y and you want y to get x's value and x to get y's value, you can't just assign this here and then assign that there, because if this is 5 and this is 10, when you assign it over here, this will destroy the existing value, put the 5 in, then copies the same thing back again. It doesn't work because the operations have to go in a sequence, right? So what you do is you create a temporary third variable, which is often called temp, right? You place the value here, then you copy this here, then you copy that in there, and then you don't care about temp anymore, and that performs a swap, right? So in order to exchange two positions in memory, you need a third variable. This is a very important thing to know about memory, right? So, let me show you. Visualize execution. There we go. So this thing gives you a handy little timeline along the bottom, which allows you to view what's going on in memory for each execution of each variable. So, for example, int x equals 5 declares x with value 5. Y, we have y being 7. Temp gets the value of 5 for some reason. That's interesting to know. Oh wait, it skipped it. So, it doesn't necessarily show every step, but so here we declared temp, but it doesn't have anything in it. Temp gets the value of x, right? After this step, x gets the value of y, then y gets the value of temp, and that performs the swap. So you can actually watch how the memory values are being exchanged using Python Tutor. It does a lot of different languages. This is also extremely useful for debugging, and it's a little bit. This is a little bit like a traditional debugger, but it puts a breakpoint in after every statement, right? And you can do things with this like, I want to see every time this line of code is executed, and it'll show you where that happens on the timeline and stuff like that. So this is an extremely useful debugging tool. I highly recommend its use for any and all of you who are attempting to learn how to program, because you can't fix bugs without knowing what the memory is doing. You must know what the memory is doing. All right? Sound good? All right. Where were we? I do a lot of digressions in class, but occasionally they're useful. At least I like to think so. Where are we here? Right. Yes. Okay. So this is a stylistic point. So let's say that you are creating a website, and perhaps that's being done according to an assignment document, and that assignment document specifies that you're supposed to make buttons out of links, but style them to look like buttons, right? The question becomes, what happens to the clickable area of the thing when you do that? So, this marker is running out. So let's say we have a link, right? If this is a link inside of a div, this being the div, the border, right? The clickable area of the link will be approximately so, right? Now, this is a problem because if somebody clicks here, they click the link. If somebody clicks over here, they do not click the link. The button press fails to happen, right? So, what you really want to do is you don't want to bind the click to the link itself. You want to bind it to the div, right? Using a click event or something similar. That way, if somebody somewhat imprecisely clicks outside of the link, but inside of the area of the button, it still works, right? Now, I understand that the course of human evolution, because of the evolutionary influence of touchscreens, means that we are all developing elongated, very narrow, spider-like fingers, like a bat. Over time, we'll be all finger, in 2,000 years. But I would ask each of you to please spare a thought for people with meaty hands, all right? People who work with their hands for a living tend to have large ones, right, that are calloused and imprecise when trying to select small things on a touchscreen. And it's no fault of their own, right? But, spare a thought for a poor farmer who has just come back from milking 50 cows by hand because he can't afford a milking machine, right? Or perhaps he's, part of a religious agricultural sect that doesn't believe in milking machines or something, right? So, for such a person, the precision with which that person can click on a link is low. The precision of your touchscreen touch is proportional, or inversely proportional to the size of your fingers, right? Another category of person I would ask you to please consider is the aged, right? Elderly people have similar problems. As your brain gets old, you lose a certain degree of precision in your fine motor skills, right? And I would also ask you to consider people who may have like a slight shake or palsy in their motions and in their fingers. That also makes the presses inaccurate, right? So when you are doing buttons for a touch screen, make them a little bit bigger than you would otherwise, right? Just a bit bigger, and it's an accessibility thing. Everybody will be much happier, and it doesn't negatively affect people who don't have, people who do have precise fingers, right? So please consider accessibility when you are designing touch interfaces. Not everybody clicks with equal precision. Okay? Sound good? Reasonable? Good. Another thing that you want to do, and this is kind of more applicable to desktop environments, but if something is clickable, consider having it do something to indicate that it's clickable when you hover over it, right? This could come in a couple of different forms. You could have a short CSS animation play that, maybe increases the size of the thing by 2% or something, give it a little bounce when you hover over it. That will indicate that it's clickable. Generally, hover events in general indicate clickability, right? Most of the time. Another thing that you can do is you can actually modify which mouse pointer is used, right? What's it called? There's a CSS property. Yes, there's a CSS property pointer. So you can set a hover event that sets pointer to cursor, which is the little hand icon, right? You want maybe regular arrow over here, and then when you're here, have the little hand, terrible looking hand. There you go. When you're actually over the thing that could be clicked on. There you go. So, does that make sense? Clickability? All good? Good. Elements of design? There we go. So, I will admit that I have a slight disagreement with the slides document, which is not really slides. The teaching article, I have a slight disagreement with it. It thinks that the following approach to accessing form elements is easier, and I disagree. I think the same way you do everything else is easier. When we are trying to get values out of forms, there are a couple of ways that we can do it. Let me just throw a quick form in here so that we have something to work on. In order for this to work, your form needs to have an ID, form 1, and form. Input type is text, name is user, input type is password, name is pass, input type is submit, name is submit. There we go. Nice, tidy little form. I didn't put any breaks or anything in, but let's see how it renders. There we go. Oh. Actually, this is another good example. So you know what I said when I said that if you put text area in for type, it'll default to just a regular text box? Well, I made a slight mistake. I said submit instead of submit. I omitted the I, and look what it's given me. It has defaulted back to its default of a text box. Submit. There we go. Now we have a submit button. So, let's say I put a little information in here. there are a couple of different ways we can access that information. The first way is using a CSS selector. Document.query selector. We can use attribute selectors. Input at type is equal to text to grab references to specific elements of a form. Of course, the issue with that is this one assumes that there's only one input of that type on the page, and if there's more than that, you need to use query selector all and select which one you want. Make sense? The other way that you can do this is to select by name. Selecting by name should be more reliable. All of your inputs should have a unique name. I don't think it's constrained so that they're like they actually are unique. Like IDs, it's a standards violation to have an ID value duplicated within the same document. I don't think that's the case with names, but as you will see when you go to server-side programming, it's just generally a really bad idea anyway. So that should be unique. If you select by that, you should be okay. It's basically serving the function of an ID, right? Although you can't select by ID for that, right? Because it's not an ID. You can't say hashtag user. That won't work, right? Make sense? Another way you could do this, you could just assign an ID and look for that ID. This is the way that you'll do pretty much everything else. It works here too. The way that the teaching article suggests is as follows. Document.forms. So document.forms. Forms is an object within the document object which collects up all of the forms in the document in one place. So I can access individual forms here using dot notation. Form 1, this form, a reference to it is contained inside of forms, right? Then, within form 1, sorry, can you see in the back? Do you need me to blow it up? I can't raise it. Well, maybe I can. Give me a second. It won't bind to the top. Here. Oh, I hate Windows. I'm sorry I can't do it. You're going to have to come up to the front. Maybe if I blow it up real big. Better? Okay. So, within document.forms.form1, I have not, like this is a reference to a DOM element, so we have all of our normal DOM methods like add event listener, append child is one that we're going to see reasonably frequently coming up. But also you can access the individual elements by name. So, oh, come on. Are the slides lying to me? Let's see here. form1 dot user. I think the slides have an inaccuracy in them. Oh, you have to, okay. Past that point, use numeric indexing like it's an array. Personally, I don't think that writing JavaScript based on the numeric position of input elements is wise, because it is subject to breakage upon change. If your HTML designer decides that, oh, for this particular website, your password should be above your username for some reason, that will break your JavaScript code if you're using this. That is why I believe it is far better to use the search functions like query selector. You do not have to share my opinion, you only have to listen to my opinion. Any questions about that? Okay. Let's see what else we got. So we've already kind of discussed this, but the value inside of a input element is bound to the value attribute and not to the inner HTML of an input element. Input elements are self-closing tags. They don't have an inner HTML, right? So to get the value out of the form, you have to use dot value in the following manner. This is almost over. Yay. Like so. One thing to be cautious of with inputs, well, I'll just show you. Let's imagine that I had another input type right here. Let's imagine that I have a numeric. Type is number. I think it's number or numeric. Is it? Yeah, number. So let's say I have a number. I would like to ask you a question. Thank you. Is that an integer? No, what is that? That's a string. Whenever you're interacting with the DOM, understand that the DOM is just string. Anything you take out of it will be a string. Anything you put into it should be easily convertible to a string at minimum. You can run into errors this way. For example, if I were to say, ooh, I have a numeric value here, what if I add 11 to it? Right? It's not a number, but it's also not a number. I hate JavaScript. Because the value is stored in the form of a string, even if it's a numeric input type, that plus sign binds to concatenation, not to arithmetic addition, which is what you probably were expecting. So, there is a function that you must use to fix this. It is called parseInt. You also have parseFloat, but for our purposes right now, parseInt. ParseInt takes a string and attempts to convert it to a number. Once it is a number, you can use it as a number. Does that make sense? So, parseInt potato gives you not a number. So be careful. Be careful that the thing you're putting into parse int actually is an int. But also be aware of this, and this is kind of getting into, like, you're going to have to know this in PHP type territory. The way that the parsing algorithm works, it starts at the left, interprets as many numeric characters as it can, and as soon as it starts hitting characters that don't make sense for a number, it stops. Right? So, 7 potato parses as 7. Potato is dropped. That make sense? I should stop asking if JavaScript makes sense. Can you follow this? Can you follow the logic? Yeah.
So basically, if we added another number to the end of it wouldn't be counted, right?
Correct.
7 potato 7.
7 potato 7 yields 7. Now this isn't actually surprising because this is actually the way that integer conversion from strings works in the C standard library. So this is actually this is not surprising that it does this. However, again, I believe if you attempted to do this in Java, this would result in a type error, right? Because the string here is not fully convertible to an integer. Make sense? Okay. Good. Let's see. Ah, there's one. So when you've written a form, clicking on the submit button will refresh the page, right? It is not necessarily the case that you want the page refreshed when the user clicks submit. The kind of tendency a lot these days is actually to perform as few page refreshes as possible, right? Perhaps you would much rather have this submit button bound to an AJAX query that sends the information to the server without refreshing, right? In such a case, you must prevent the default behavior of the form in order to effect this. So, just as a demonstration, if I click submit, page refreshes. If I go in here and say document dot query selector hashtag form1 dot add event listener, submit, yes, submit, function, event, dot prevent default. There you go. So it is important. So I made I almost made a mistake. So how many ways are there for a form to be submitted? There's clicking on the submit button. What's the other one? So depending on how the form's been set up, and I think if it lacks a submit button, if you press enter while you're in a text field, that will also submit the form. So rather than try to understand all of the different ways that a form could possibly be submitted, basically you have a choice of binding this to the individual inputs or to the form itself. If you just target the submit action, then this will run before the form submits and the page refreshes, right? So you don't have to worry about remembering all of the ways that a form gets submitted. You just say, on submit, do this. Make sense? So this is a little cleaner and safer. Save, save, save. I will demonstrate. ASDF, ASDF, or submit. There you go. And if I really wanted to, I could say something like console.log. Sure, I definitely sent that to the server. Sarcastic prompt. So, yeah. Does that make sense? Any questions? Let me just check to see. I think we're at the end of, let's see here. Yeah. I'm not going to be covering creating your own objects in class, except to mention that JavaScript does it terribly. Next class, we will be starting with SVG graphics. All right. Thank you very much, and have a good week.
You too.